Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Robert Lufkin and welcome to the Health Longevity Secrets Show, where we talk to the experts and find out their secrets for health and longevity. Not only what they recommend, but what they actually do for themselves. Hi everybody, welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about stress and how resilience leads to health and longevity with our expert guest, Dr. Stephen Sideroff from UCLA. Dr. Sideroff is both a clinician and a scientist who has developed a groundbreaking program called The Path that develops a model of healing, resilience, and success that addresses the obstacles to optimal functioning. Stephen is an internationally recognized expert in resilience, optimal performance, addiction, neurofeedback, and alternative approaches to stress and mental health. He is an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at UCLA School of Medicine, as well as director of the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Ethics. For over 40 years, Dr. Sideroff has been passionate about studying and understanding resilience and optimal performance. He has developed and established innovative models of behavior and treatment approaches for restoring physical, emotional, mental balance, and effectiveness around the world. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Stephen, how did you come to be interested in this area?
You know, Rob, I actually began my career doing brain research, very much interested in finding out learning and memory pathways in the brain. But I wanted to work with people, not with animals, and I wanted to be able to ask my subjects how they experienced what we were doing and what goes on in their lives. And I wasn't able to do that with the animals that I was working with. So I moved into clinical work and realized very early on that stress is a primary modulator of anything else that you might be interested in working with an individual. A person could handle life situations and do pretty well coping until you add stress to their lives, until they begin to have problems with the stresses in their lives. And when that happens, whether you're working with an individual, whether you're working with a couple or even a community, coping mechanisms begin to break down. And so I wanted to address how people dealt with stress very early on, because I saw how it was an important factor no matter what we were looking at. The interesting thing, Rob, was that when I began doing workshops on stress, I started out thinking, oh, this is great. I'm giving people exactly what they need in their lives, because people and individuals and corporations would come to me with stress-related problems. And so I started doing workshops, and people would come to me at the end of their my workshops and say, hey, this is great. I didn't realize the impact of stress in all these different ways. And you know, you gave great tools. But a few months later, I would follow up with many of these people to discover that very few of them were really benefiting from the workshops, however good they were, and literally were not using any of the techniques or following through with any of the processes that we talked about. And that got me to looking at people's resistance to dealing with stress. And that became a whole other area of my research. And one of the things that became key to that is how we have this ambivalence around stress. On the one hand, we realize how it's impacting us. On the other hand, we put more and more stress into our lives. And that began my research into the interface between our defense mechanisms, our early childhood experiences, how we modeled our behavior after our parents, and how those early lessons get locked into our, not only into our behavior, but literally into the development of our brains.
If I could interrupt you here, Stephen, and one point, just for clarification for our audience, when you correct me if I'm wrong, when you're talking about stress, we're talking about sort of the negative chronic stress that occurs in people, and because there's some literature about acute stress or hormetic stress from exercise or saunas or cold ice water baths, and how that can be beneficial to health and longevity. But just to be clear, we're talking about chronic stress, which has a negative effect on health and longevity, correct?
Well, yes, that's the point. Stress in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. It's if you're not managing it well, if you're not modulating it, if you're not recovering after a stressful experience. And so when you look at the lives of many people that grew up in childhood environments, for example, that were dangerous, stressful, traumatic, it sets up a life expectation in terms of how they act, how they behave. And so they may be on guard, they may be on alert for danger. And when you do that, the nervous system doesn't distinguish between real danger and imagined or expected danger. Your body mobilizes with the sympathetic branch of the nervous system, the fight or flight branch of the nervous system. And when that happens, you use up valuable resources of the body. And this is where it has an impact on aging. It has an impact on the disease process, because our bodies don't have an unlimited amount of resources. And so if you're continually using them up because you're on guard, you're expecting something negative to happen, and you don't recover those resources, that actually is one of the sources of inflammation, oxidation, some of the very basic biological and biochemical and physiological processes that cause aging in the body.
Are those concepts related to the primitive gestalt concept that you've come up with? I enjoyed reading about that in your book and elsewhere. Does this tie in there?
It does. Expectation, yes. When I refer to primitive gestalt patterns, I'm talking about the lessons learned during childhood. Our earliest learning is survival learning, learning what works and what doesn't work in life, what to expect. And we don't go out and survey hundreds of families on how life works and what's the best way to live your life. We have our own little tiny world that's our family, and we don't know any better. That's the world to us. That's how the world works. And so we literally adapt to that childhood environment. We literally learn the lessons about who we are, how the world works in relationship based on what goes on in our early childhood environment. And our brains literally develop based on that learning. And that's what I refer to as our primitive gestalt patterns, those lessons of childhood that say, for example, a parent tells you you're never going to amount to much. Or a parent may be depressed and doesn't have the energy to give you attention. But as a child, you're not able to say, oh, well, I understand my mother or father's depressed. We say, what's wrong with me that my mother or father doesn't even want to give me the attention that I need? So we turn it back on to ourselves. And these are the lessons that we grow up with that define who we are.
So what are the healthy ways of dealing with this stress? How we all have stress in our lives. It's unavoidable. It's part of modern life. So how do we approach that in a healthy way?
Well, the first thing is to realize that a lot of our behavior, a lot of our thinking is not necessarily good thinking, good behavior, that it develops out of these childhood lessons. So the first is really to start questioning some of those lessons and being open and willing to realize that if we don't feel good about ourselves, it's not because there's something really wrong with ourselves, there's something wrong with the lessons that we learned. One of the things I always emphasize to people is these lessons are not in your DNA, that they are learned lessons. And just as they are learned lessons, you can unlearn them as well. And I refer to what I consider to be the two primary factors that have to do with all of our lives. On the one hand, these are these primitive gestalt patterns, very powerful lessons that have a gravitational pull to them. But on the other hand, we have a tremendous degree of neuroplasticity, the ability to learn new lessons. And these two powerful forces struggle with each other. And my model of resilience is designed to enhance the neuroplasticity aspect and begin to let go of some of those early lessons, to learn new ways of being. And little by little, it's a gradual process of losing the grip that the primitive gestalt patterns have on us. And I do this through my model of resilience that has 9 pillars to it, and the notion of the path. And people get very discouraged in the process because of the powerfulness of those childhood lessons. And what I show them is all it takes on a moment by moment, day by day basis is to find your way onto the path, which is living based on my model of resilience. And yes, you're going to fall off the path because of the old lessons, but getting back onto the path is literally just takes one step, doing one thing right, finding one way of treating yourself better to be on the path, one way of practicing a relaxation exercise to restore balance between the two branches of your nervous system, etc.
And we all understand what stress is. Now, resilience, what exactly is resilience, and how is that the key to a healthy handling of stress?
Mm-hmm. There have been a lot of different definitions of resilience. The study of resilience really began by looking at children who grew up under very difficult, stressful, traumatic circumstances, but seemed to thrive despite that. And those children were studied to see what caused them to be able to get past all of these childhood traumas. For me, what I focus on are the internal mechanisms, what I bring to the table that allows me to be resilient. And so one of them is literally to have a good relationship with myself, to treat myself well, to be accepting of myself rather than judgmental and critical of myself. Because resilience is about being able to balance out the activation of your nervous system with the recovery of your nervous system. Resilience is about being able to engage in a stressful experience, because we have stressful experiences all the time. But after the stress is over, to be able to recover baseline, to be able to restore the balance in your body. So resilience is about every moment of your life optimally dealing with whatever it is that's going on. So there's the cognitive aspect of it, having a positive approach. There's the emotional aspect, being able to manage your emotions. And there's the physical aspect of it, being able to relax, being able to calm your nervous system down, being able to get a good night's sleep. These are all aspects of what goes into resilience and being someone who's resilient.
What's the best way for people to start on the path? By the way, I should show our audience, this is my copy, my well-worn copy of Steve's book, The Path, Mastering the 9 Pillars of Resilience and Success. If someone wants to go on the path and through your book, what would they do what could they do right now as a first step to start going on the path?
There's 2 things that I would recommend. First is where am I starting? What's my starting point? And to find that out, I actually developed a 40-item self-scoring questionnaire that a person can take. And from that, they can actually plot out their profile along my 9 dimensions of resilience. If they go to my website, drstephensideroff.com, they can actually download my resilience assessment booklet that contains this questionnaire that they can take. My book also incorporates the questionnaire. So one thing is, what's my starting point? Which of these 9 pillars are my areas of weakness, needing more development, and which are the areas of my strength? So that's one thing. But the other is really a desire and motivation and intention to become more resilient. It's a process that requires paying attention, focusing, and awareness. So to start off, a person must make a decision, I want to become more resilient. So those are the 2 places, the motivation, the desire to be more resilient, to want to really literally slow down the aging process, because stress and resilience do relate to the aging process. So it's the motivation and it's where's my starting point. That's the beginning. Those would be the first steps.
Yeah, if there's any doubt that stress is a significant factor on aging, at least our current biomarkers for aging, we just spoke with Kara Fitzgerald, Dr. Kara Fitzgerald, in a recent interview, who's an expert on epigenetic methylation clocks for aging, which are ways of determining biological age by methylation, as opposed to chronological age, which we determine by our birth dates. But it was interesting that Dr. Fitzgerald mentioned that 60% of the methylation sites in the standard Horvath methylation clocks that are the gold standard now are related to glucocorticoid systems in the body. And of course, the glucocorticoid axis is basically our stress axis, the way that with glucocorticoids and other stress hormones, the way they do it. So at least a third of aging biomarkers are directly tied to stress. So absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, we know it intuitively, we know that if we put too much stress on our bodies, it's going to have deleterious effects. But now we have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of studies that have linked stress with factors that can contribute to aging. And more recently, there have been a number of studies that have looked at telomere length. And telomeres are what we might call the caps at the end of our chromosomes, our DNA, that holds the DNA in place. And when cells divide and the DNA splits off, these telomeres at the ends, almost like the ends of shoelaces, the little plastics, hold everything in place. But with each successive cell division, those telomeres get a little bit shorter. And so after a certain number of replications, those telomeres shortened so much that the cells can't be duplicated. And we now have a number of studies showing that stress speeds up the shortening of these telomeres. So they are speeding up the reducing the longevity of our basic cells in our body. So we actually have more and more evidence of these relationships.
Well, that's fascinating. Is there kind of taking the opposite, asking the question the opposite way, now that we've shown that stress accelerates telomere changes as a marker for aging, has anyone taken the next step and showing that reducing stress with like a program such as yours on the path will affect telomere length favorably to actually slow aging or even reverse aging, at least as a telomere is a biomarker for?
Right. We're beginning to see some research, some initial steps in that direction, and it looks promising. So, and I expect that the answer will be a clear yes as more and more research is done in this area.
Yeah, and I guess as we understand the clocks better, and there are more and more clocks with telomeres and proteomics and glycination and methylation, we'll have more access to them. And even we're going to be speaking in another episode with a CEO and founder of a company for a biomarker clock that costs under $100 that'll be available for people. So
nice.
we'll get more and more access to these kind of markers and hopefully get more information.
Yeah. Well, one other way that I look at this, Rob, is that our bodies have a certain amount of energy. It's not unlimited. And the body makes a choice between defense on the one hand and healing, growth, maintenance on the other hand. The more a person is in the stress mode, which is a danger mode, the more they are on guard, more they're expecting problems in their lives. Worry, for example. The more their body goes into the defensive mode, circling the wagons, so to speak. The more the energy goes there, the less energy is available for healing and maintenance and development and growth. And so we're always on a moment by moment basis where our bodies are making these choices. So the more that you can be able to, and when I have people practice a relaxation exercise, I tell them the first thing you want to do as you sit down to do it is to remind yourself that you're safe. There's no danger. Nothing can happen to you for the next 15 or 20 minutes that you practice this. You are safe. That gives your body permission to send their energy into the healing maintenance mode as you turn down the activation of your nervous system. And so that's a model of how you can facilitate your slowing the aging process, is the more time you give your body in that healing mode, the less time you go into the defensive stress protective mode, you're giving your body more opportunity to repair and heal and grow.
It's fascinating, Steve, that model for the sort of binary nature of the stress response really echoes what the longevity genetics research has just been uncovering in the last 5 to 10 years. The ideas of like mTOR signaling proteins or AMP kinase or the sirtuins, where they're either turned up or turned down, and shifts the body's resources from repair and autophagy, getting rid of senescent cells, versus growth on the other side. And it's fascinating how that fits right in with the genetic models of longevity that we're beginning to understand. And these the genetic models, interestingly, are conserved biologically going back billions of years. In other words, they're present in yeasts all the way to human beings. And it's fascinating how this is happening.
Yeah, yeah. But there's one aspect here that's a little counterintuitive that I want to add to this. And you alluded to like ice baths and things like that, and purposely stressing the body. And I'll add something to that, and that has to do with our capacity. So if you think about an engine and ability to go up a hill, which we can compare to stress. You're stressing a car more if you have it go up a hill. The bigger the engine, the bigger the capacity of that engine, the easier it will handle the stress of that hill, right? Okay.
Yeah.
How does that translate to us? Well, the more we have capacity to deal with stress, the less stressed we are by the stresses. So when we challenge ourselves to learn more, when we challenge ourselves to do things that we haven't done before, we're growing our learning, we're growing our capacity to handle stresses better. We're growing our confidence. When we do that, we experience stress in a much more effective manner. We are stress becomes more what we've referred to as eustress. You alluded to it earlier. This is a concept that Hans Selye, the person who actually coined the term stress, took it into the behavioral realm. He used that term eustress for positive stresses. Positive stresses, a promotion, a marriage, a baby, they're stressful, but they don't impact the body the way distress does. Okay? So when we engage in certain stresses that challenge us to grow and grow our capacity, they actually help to make us more resilient.
So the use stressors versus in other words, the positive stresses versus the negative, harmful stresses, is it just a matter of the time effect that the positive stressors are short acting and the negative stressors are chronic, or it's something more nuanced than that?
It's more nuanced that some of the toxic aspects of the stress response are not as prevalent in eustress. So it's not an absolute, because you can be very effective in your life in handling stress, but still, if you pile more and more stresses on, it's still going to have a deleterious effect. So it's a modulator, but it's not an absolute here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So someone who grows up with the message that they're not okay, and then as an adult, they're very competent and they're very successful, but they haven't worked on themselves. And so they have this unconscious drive to achieve more and more because somehow they've translated more money, more success into that's how I can feel good about myself. They are not, I would not call them a resilient person, because they have not really figured out what's driving them, what's motivating them, and the secret of happiness. They've not learned that. They think it comes from getting more money, getting more possessions, things like that, and that will never be the answer to happiness. So eustress is not the only answer here. It's also working through those primitive gestalt patterns so that you really are in alignment in many ways with yourself.
Is there any way for me to tell, let's say if I'm in a situation and I'm going, wow, this is really stressful. It might be exercise, it might be a sauna, or it might be an argument with a spouse or a friend, or some chronic business thing. Are there questions I can ask myself, or things I can look at in the situation to tell if this is a positive stress or a negative stress? Any ways to sort those out?
Well, it's the answer is yes, but it's not a simple answer. So what I find is that the people in that category that I just described, who are unconscious to their driving forces of underneath feeling inadequate, for example, feeling like they're pulling the wool over people's eyes. And so they'll have a big success. One of the keys here is it'll feel good, but only momentarily. The next day, they're back to where they started from, still needing the next success in order to feel okay. That these successes don't go in deep enough to really have that impact and make a difference on a deeper level. And that's because we have, to some degree, blocked ourselves from our deeper feelings because as a child, they're too painful to really deal with. And so we found ways of pushing them down. And this is what I refer to as unfinished emotional business, emotional issues that have not been dealt with, but will continue to drive what we do in our lives, because we always have this unconscious, instinctual need to resolve this unfinished business. But if we don't understand it fully, if we haven't really explored this fully, we will go about that process in an unhealthy way. That's why a lot of times we choose partners that are very similar to the parent from our childhood that we have unfinished business with. We're unconsciously trying to finish with someone else the business that was unfinished here. And many times we choose a partner that's just as incapable as our parent to meet our needs.
Yeah, very fascinating and very, very complex and interesting material. I wonder, Steve, in addition to if our audience wants to learn more about this and even work with you on this, in addition to the book, are there other ways that they can access your expertise on this? Any other programs that are available for them?
Yes, definitely. Anybody who's interested can reach out to me. I'm at sideroff@ucla.edu. But best is to go to my website, drstephensideroff.com. My book is available at amazon.com. But on my website, I have a lot of articles that I've written. And I also have a couple of audio programs. I have one in particular called Resilience. Takes you step by step through a 6-week program based on my model of resilience. That's one other program I have. You can get on my mailing list. Last year, I did what I call 365 steps on the path of resilience and success, sort of in reaction to the pandemic. A lot of people were reaching out to me because their level of stress had gone up and they were having difficulty coping. So I did a program where every day I sent out a message of resilience with an actual action step that a person can take. And so I'm actually getting ready to publish that as my next book. but I'm also getting ready to do another daily step program that I'm calling the Path of Wisdom. And so soon I'll be starting that. People, if they go to my website and get on my mailing list, they will be notified of when I'm starting that program as well.
Great, and we'll have links in the show notes to all those all your resources there for people to access too.
Cool.
On the path, I'm wondering, is it possible to do you of the 9 steps? Is what's the I guess what's the easiest step that people have the least problem with, and what's the most challenging step? Or can you generalize that way, or is it different for everybody at all?
It is different for everybody. Let me just briefly share with your audience what those 9 steps are. So
Great.
There are 3 areas. The first area is relationship. The second area is organismic balance and mastery. And the third area is how we engage with the world. So within relationship, there's your relationship with yourself, relationship with others, and relationship with something greater, which could be spirituality or purpose and meaning in life and giving service, something that connects you to the larger community. Within organismic balance and mastery, there's physical balance and mastery. And this, when people talk about stress management, that's usually the primary area that they're talking about, physical balance and mastery. Mental, cognitive balance and mastery, and then emotional balance and mastery. And then the last 3 are presence, flexibility, and the last one is power, which I define as the ability to get things done. People struggle really the most with the first because a lot of the others stem from the first, which is your relationship with yourself. And this has to do with primitive gestalt patterns that we've been talking about. And, you know, we can go to a counselor, we can go to a therapist for 1 hour a week and get some useful information, but we're with our internal voice 24/7. We hear that voice, we hear the messages of what I also refer to as our internal parent 24/7. And where does that internal parent message derive from? Well, the lessons of childhood. And typically we have an internal parent that could be overly critical with ourselves and have very difficult time being accepting and compassionate with ourselves. So I'll just say right now that I work with people, and my book and my programs work with people to begin recognizing how we treat ourselves and begin comparing that to how a healthy internal parent, internal voice would speak. And the healthy internal parent comes from a place of love, compassion, acceptance, support, and care. Those are the hallmarks of the characteristics, qualities of a healthy internal parent. So now we can begin recognizing a model for health and begin comparing ours with that. There's a psychologist by the name of John Gottman out of the University of Washington, and he does a lot of work with couples. And he actually has a research studio where couples go there and spend a few days, and he has cameras in every room following them around. But one of the interesting findings of his research is that when you look at healthy couples, they have a ratio of about 20-to-1 positive to negative interactions, behaviors, language, messages of all different kinds. When that ratio comes down to about 5-to-1, the relationship is in trouble.
Wow.
So I like to use this, and this is everybody in your audience can actually, as another first step, can start monitoring their self-talk and begin to see, do I use more 20 to 1 positive to negative self-talk messages to myself? Or is it closer to 5 to 1 positive to negative? And maybe some in your audience, it might even be 5 to 1 where there's more negative to positive. You didn't do that right. You should have done this better. Why can't you do this? Messages like that. So that's a very useful beginning tool of how am I talking to myself? How am I treating myself? Because that, more than anything else, produces stress.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I wouldn't have thought that even 5 to 1 on positive to negative is still is starting to be on the bad side. Wow.
Right.
Well, before we move on to you, any other questions on any other things you want to highlight on your program here?
Well, the one other thing I would say is when we talk about starting points, if everybody thinks about their day and you kind of visualize your day, most of us are going from one stress to another stress to another stress. Every time we engage in a stressful situation, we are activating the sympathetic branch of our nervous system. And usually what happens is we'll engage in a stress, even when we're successful in dealing with it, before we give ourselves the opportunity to recover, we are looking around for the next danger, the next stress, and further activating and further activating. And before our day is just beginning, we've already stretched the resources of our body. Like a rubber band, you think of it stretching and stretching. Rubber bands, for them to be functional, you have to release before you stretch them again. So another starting point would be to balance that out, would be to practice some form of relaxation meditation on a daily basis. Because not only when you engage in these stressful behaviors are you having an impact on a daily basis, but your actual ability, if this is baseline, this is activation of your nervous system, this is recovery, on a daily basis, what I'm referring to actually causes a loss of the ability to go down to these deep levels of calm. So our range actually shrinks, but it shrinks this way. And the baseline creeps up, but we don't notice because we've adapted. So all of your audience right now sitting around are not aware that they're holding tension in their shoulders, in their jaw, and other parts of their body, that their nervous system is a bit activated. And the only way to address this is to practice the opposite response, the parasympathetic, the recovery response. So that's another starting point for people to think about.
Are there any programs you recommend or apps that you recommend for meditation or for people who want to get started with this and learning that relaxation response?
Yeah. So for starters, again, if people go to my website, I have a free audio download that they're welcome to receive and download for themselves as starters. There are a number of different apps that are easily available and discovered when you go to the App Store. But for starters, if they wanted, I have one very good one on my own, on my drstephensideroff.com, that it's a free download.
Right. Yeah. The relaxation and resetting is such a powerful tool for so many reasons. That's great. Well, Stephen, the last couple minutes, how about you? Are you on the path?
Good question, Rob. And what's beautiful about the work that I do, is that I'm continually reminding myself of the path as I share with you, your audience, and the individuals that I work with. So on the one hand, I'm always reminded, and that's one of the things that people have to do is they have to find ways of reminding themselves to be on the path. But in my own work, I feel like if I'm going to ask people to do anything, I should be able to do it myself, and I should have gone through the process that I'm asking everybody else to. That's the only way I think that people actually will trust what I have to say, is they can tell simply by spending any time with me whether I'm on the path or not. And so, because I've gotten into this area because of how important I think it is, and it's been part of my own life journey to be on the path, whether it's of resilience or peak performance. I do a lot of work with executives and athletes in peak performance, and there again, whatever I'm teaching them, I want to make sure that I've done myself. So I think I have been fortunate in that I've had a very good childhood. I feel very blessed about that. And so with loving parents. So I've had a head start, so to speak, in this area. And I do feel very blessed about that. But there are areas where no parents are perfect. No childhood is perfect. And so there are areas that I've been challenged. And one of the things that I've learned, Rob, is that any area that you're challenged, that's the area you want to pay attention to. Any weakness that you notice, any time where I'm reluctant to do something, go into a particular area, I've learned that that's where my biggest lessons are. And so to answer your question, it's an attitude that I have of wanting to learn, wanting to grow, wanting to face these challenges, because I know that's where my greatest growth lies. And so I've taken that approach in life. I've taken the dare. I've taken the challenge because I want to challenge myself. I want to take a look at these areas and face the dangers, because I've learned, and as you do it, you begin to learn more and more, and you gain confidence and you grow, and that's the area. The other area creates constriction. I'm not going to do this. It's too scary. It's too dangerous. It's too uncomfortable. That is the anti-resilience approach. So I've learned from experience, and I've learned from taking the challenge.
Does it get easier as you get more and more into this?
On the one hand, it gets easier, but then when it gets easier, you're willing to take bigger challenges. And those bigger challenges, on the one hand, can be just as difficult and challenging, except that I can look back at my history and I could see that I've been successful. That encourages me. And I could see that when I've messed up, it wasn't the end of the world. And that's the other important lesson, that you can make mistakes and you can learn to recover. You can blow it and it's not the end of the world. So on many levels, going in that direction, taking the challenges, always have lessons that serve you in your journey through life, in your journey on the path through life.
That's great. In our last couple of minutes, Steve, are there any other tools or lifestyle things that you do as far as sleep, exercise, diet, supplements that you'd like to share with our audience?
Always learning, always challenging, because that's what keeps my brain active. be willing to be a child. Be willing to experience life from a child's perspective of wonderment, of excitement, because again, that's what expands your brain, the functioning of your brain. But I also believe that we talk about stem cells, right? And we talk about early cells. Well, one way to tap into early is to be willing to be inquisitive, act like a child. I love my time with my grandchildren. I'll get on the floor with them and I'll get into their stories, I'll get into their games, because I'm touching into that earliness of life, which I believe has a restorative quality to it. So that's another way, but it's staying on the path and realizing that there is a path, and the path is defined by optimally functioning every moment of your life. And we're not going to be able to do that, but we can strive for that. And every time we fall off the path, as defined in my book and the 9 pillars, we just pick ourselves up and get back onto the path. And that's the best that we can do.
Wow, thank you so much. That's so beautiful, Steve. This has been a great episode, and I've been looking forward to this for so long. I'm so glad to get you on the program, and I hope to get you back on after the next book comes out, and I really want to revisit this again.
Great. And I must tell the audience that Rob is also a model of resilience as well. I have firsthand experience.
Yeah, we'll do a whole episode on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thanks again, Steve, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Okay.
Note: this is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking of it because of something you have seen here. If you find this to be of value of you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support the work we do on this channel. Also, we take your suggestions and advice very seriously. Please let us know what you'd like to see on this channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll hope to see you next time.